For a while now, American cities have been on the decline. Overall, as a country, we've seen the prices for a simple apartment soar, along with the overall cost of living. It feels like every day now where we hear about some story about someone making six figures still struggling to pay for their basic needs. But why is this? Why are these cities on the decline? And why are they becoming harder to live in? As a kid, I grew up in San Francisco, a relatively dense urban environment. But when I was about to start high school, my parents decided to move us out to the suburbs. As I was getting used to the new environment, I noticed that things felt a lot different here than living in the city, but I couldn't figure out why. Over time, I realized that it just felt more inconvenient. It felt like I had to rely on my parents to take me around everywhere, and there just wasn't as many things to do. I questioned why this was, and this is when I discovered the world of urban planning. I watched YouTube videos and read articles, all with the goal of learning more about cities and how they're designed. One of my biggest realizations during this time was that urban planning has a much bigger impact on the world than what people realize. The way that a city is designed can drastically influence someone's lifestyle in a bunch of different ways, from where they shop to how they get places. Researching the topic, I realized that the history of these now troubled cities were extremely deep and storied, not always being in the state that they are now. These cities were once some of the best in the world, and I would like to take you through some of the history of these cities and the history of urban planning in America. What exactly went wrong, and what exactly can planners do to make our cities better? To understand why places in America are designed the way they are, two things need to be understood: land use and transportation. First, let's talk about land use. When we talk about land use, a huge part of conversation is zoning. Zoning being the set of laws which determines what buildings can be built and where. Zoning was created in the early 20th century, when industrial plants and factories could be found within neighborhoods and downtowns. It was created to separate land use that was harmful to the residents of these cities. These factories were now prohibited by law from being built inside of the city core, and by moving them to outside of the city, it greatly improved overall health for city residents. From there, zoning expanded, creating a ton of little subsections and eventually covering pretty much everything that can be built. Today, there are four kinds of main uses outlined by zoning: residential, commercial, industrial, and agricultural, each with their own subsets of zones dictating what types of buildings within these categories can be built. Today, zoning is very important to designing cities, which we'll cover later. Next, let's talk about some of the recent history of transportation. After World War II, there was a radical change in how the American government viewed transportation. In the 1950s, President Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, which gave the funds to construct a nationwide network of highways connecting every American city. These new interstate highways gave citizens the ability to commute longer distances to their places of work, which were typically inside of the city. This is when people started moving out of the city and into suburbs. These suburbs were built to be accessed only by car, which was supported by the nationwide de-emphasis on other forms of transportation. And what happened to the other aforementioned forms of transportation? Well, these mostly came in the form of vast streetcar networks spanning entire cities. They were among the best transit services in the world, and they provided the riders of the day with convenient, frequent, and accessible service, allowing for easy travel across cities. In the 1950s, big auto and oil companies began buying up these streetcar and rail lines and began tearing up the tracks. A very notable place where this happened was in Los Angeles, a city that is now mostly known to be car-oriented. LA once had the largest streetcar network in the entire world, but in the mid-40s, a company named National City Lines bought up the Los Angeles Railway. This new company was backed by companies such as General Motors, Standard Oil, and other such companies. Soon enough, the entire network was gone, with meager bus service and automobiles being the replacements. Another instance of this happening was in the San Francisco Bay Area, and its Key system. The Key system was a streetcar network which operated mostly in the East Bay, but upon the opening of the Bay Bridge in 1936, there was actually a section of the Key system which ran on it, connecting into San Francisco. The key system provided an easy and convenient way to get across the bay until its demise in 1958, where National City Lines, again, now owning the company, would decide to end service across the Bay Bridge and tear up the tracks, replacing them with a couple more car lanes.
The transit loss in light of today's needs was nothing less than tragic. We had a cheap, efficient, practically pollution-free transit system, the nucleus of what could have been the best and most extensive in the world.
This same pattern also happened to San Francisco's streetcar network, with only small parts of it remaining due to right-of-ways and tunnels that couldn't be converted for automobile use. These remain in use today as the Muni Metro system. Now that we've talked a little bit about the history of America's transportation, let's talk about America's suburbs. I mentioned before that a period of mass suburbanization started around the 1950s, and this style of living is largely the same today. This period of time saw many families move into spacious homes outside of the city and commute into work via a car. This might seem all well and good, but there are a lot of major problems that arise from building our cities this way. When we talk about transportation, cars are uniquely different in that building large infrastructure projects for cars actively reduces the capabilities of other modes of transit. Due to the larger distances of travel, as well as the larger amount of space that a car takes up per person, buses and trains become less reliable, cycling takes longer, and walking becomes arduous and dangerous. When cars are the only truly viable form of transport for most people, it creates major congestion on the roads, and what was advertised as a method of transit that represents freedom becomes incapacitated, stuck in miles of traffic on the highway. What's worse is that the way America built its highways was extremely destructive to a lot of people. As the construction for the interstate highways was underway, planners inside of every American city decided to build urban freeways which cut right through city centers. This reportedly surprised President Eisenhower, as this concept had never been considered before. This was because of the sheer amount of destruction that a project such as an urban freeway would cause to a city. During this period, people like Robert Moses were famous for deeming specifically minority neighborhoods as blight and would use this excuse to bulldoze these neighborhoods, replacing them with an urban freeway. These freeways destroyed communities and displaced tens of thousands of people per project. In San Francisco, there were projects such as the I-80 freeway, which cut right through downtown, and the Geary Boulevard. Geary in particular saw around 30,000 San Franciscans displaced, mostly African, Japanese, and Jewish Americans. This boulevard cut right through the neighborhoods, creating a physical separation between Japantown and the Fillmore. In Los Angeles, a notable example was Sugar Hill. This was among the wealthiest and prosperous African American neighborhoods in LA, and a very big portion of it was destroyed to make way for the I-10. This trend happened across every major metropolitan area in the US, cutting directly into the livelihoods of these communities. Another thing that this did was it reduced the amount of revenue that the cities were getting, as tens of thousands of people were now not paying taxes to the city, making it more difficult to finance the growing costs of these highway expansion projects. Profitability is something that isn't of too much concern to major cities themselves due to their large populations, but finances become way bigger of an issue as you start to take a closer look at the suburbs. No matter how you look at it, American-style suburbs are not profitable, and this is due to something which planners and experts have dubbed the growth Ponzi scheme. In American suburbs, neighborhoods are exclusively zoned for detached single-family homes. These neighborhoods of single-family homes are very far from other amenities that would be within walking distance in a typical city neighborhood, so residents have to drive to the nearest strip mall or big box store that is accompanied by huge free parking lots. This low density and car-centric design is extremely wasteful when it comes to land use. The larger distances between houses naturally means that you're going to need to spend more money extending things like power, water, and sewage, which is then accompanied by big spaces, which are taken up by free parking, earning absolutely no revenue for the city whatsoever. This, however, is initially met with a tax base that can pay for all of these costs pretty well, and for a while, the city is actually taking in a profit. However, as maintenance bills start to pile up, the lower tax base of these cities can no longer pay for basic costs, and debts start piling up left and right for the city. And this is where the Ponzi scheme part comes in. To help pay for the maintenance bills, the city resorts to expanding its borders and building new developments, which in time worsen the problem, as now these new developments have maintenance costs piling up. This is how suburban cities stay alive, with constant new developments being built to fund the old ones. It should be obvious to anybody that this isn't sustainable in the slightest. People tell me all the time about how transit is unprofitable in today's world, and they use that as a justification not to build it. What people fail to realize is that car infrastructure is even more unprofitable than transit, as outside of tolls, you have no other forms of revenue coming in that aren't taxes. And this relates to the housing crisis that America is currently facing in many of its cities. As a result of the expansion of the suburbs, the inner cities have been largely neglected. The biggest cause to the inflation of housing prices is simply that there aren't enough high-density units, causing the ones that are here to soar in price. The zoning laws of many cities prevents the expansion of building styles that promote cheaper and more sustainable ways of living, opting to stick to the currently exclusionary laws. There is a style of zoning which combines medium and high-density units with commercial businesses that are in close proximity to where people work and live. It is called mixed-use zoning, and for a while now, it has been the clear way to go when designing efficient cities, as the burden of owning a car is no longer necessary for the common person, and the higher tax base relieves revenue pressure on the city as well. Using mixed-use zoning around high-capacity transit stops is called transit-oriented development, and building mixed-use developments within walking or biking distance to a transit stop is a great way to improve mobility and quality of life inside of city neighborhoods. It also greatly improves the efficiency of the transit modes that are close to these homes and stores. Mixed-use zoning is a great way to bring about a more sustainable way of living, as it keeps the wasteful and car-centric land use to a minimum, instead making it easier and safer to walk, cycle, or use a bus, tram, or train. However, bringing about this change in zoning can be difficult. The reason why rezoning to make mixed use possible is so difficult in cities is because of the huge backlash it gets from the people living in the surrounding area, who do everything they can to stop positive change from happening in our cities. These people are called NIMBYs, standing for Not in My Backyard. Despite constant backlash from these typically older groups of people, the rezoning projects and developments that have been able to get through often have very positive effects. Overall, there currently is a lot of support for undoing the mistakes of the post-World War II era of city design. Right now, planners are seeing a movement to remove the I-980 freeway, which cut right through Oakland's downtown, a project which would reconnect West Oakland with the rest of the city. The problem of affordable housing does seem to be getting worse, but the groundwork is being laid for a bettering of this problem, as cities get more and more political will from its residents to see a change. If you want to see a change, participate in your local politics. At the neighborhood level, even one voice can do a lot to change things. Even one vote can heavily influence things when it comes to pushing your local community in the right direction. Advocate for change that helps your city, and help create the positive developments that can revitalize our struggling municipalities. Thanks for watching.